Welcome to this course where we'll introduce you to the newest version of OpenMRS, which we call OpenMRS 3. You might already be familiar with OpenMRS as our community has been around now for almost 20 years. And here are some amazing applications of OpenMRS medical record system, from supporting a floating clinic in Cambodia to maternity clinics and HIV clinics around the world. But the world changes, and so do our users' needs. So today we're going to walk you through how to use OpenMRS 3 to meet your users' needs.
All right, let's go through the key components. This is really the product and technology overview that we want to get started with here. So you might already know about the OpenMRS platform, which we also sometimes call core or backend. And this is really the brain of OpenMRS. It's the thing that's having memory and storing information about what you're doing with the system, what kind of patients you've been caring for, what is the problem, etc., etc. Within that OpenMRS brain, that platform, it's particularly important for our brain to have a dictionary. This is by which I mean the medical codes and the metadata. So for example, let's say that a patient has malaria. Our brain can't store malaria without having a word for malaria. And in the same way, our data model requires a specific code for that metadata or clinical medical issue. So for example, in your OpenMRS system, you would need a specific medical code for malaria in your dictionary. You'd also need an API. We need a way to query the brain and to ask the brain, hey, what do you already know about this patient? And that's what we use our APIs for. We have a very robust documented REST API, which most O3 developers use very heavily. But we recommend that folks increasingly use the FHIR API. And that's because as your team or your government needs or requests for more interoperability and connections between healthcare related softwares, FHIR is really the standard to follow and the way to go. And we'll cover that a bit more this week in the API session. So this is, of course, how we're calling the brain. And then the next component is the user interface, also known as the front end. And this is the face of the application, what you can see as a user. Now, someone asked at the beginning with the expectation setting about whether version 3 means just this face or the entire thing together. Excellent question, and the answer is both. Right now, OpenMRS 3 uses a version 2 of OpenMRS platform. This is not a platform upgrade. We have not made significant changes to the data model for OpenMRS 3. OpenMRS 3 is really a change to the front end. And you might remember from OpenMRS 2, not platform 2, but user interface 2, we called that the reference application or the ref app. And when we bundle all of these together, we call that the ref app. So ref app version 2 was when we had front end version 2. Ref app version 3 is when we have front end version 3, but whatever is the latest platform. And in this case, the latest platform is still major version 2. So don't worry, upgrading to OpenMRS 3 does not require a platform upgrade, depending on the version of platform you're already at. You need to be on 2.3 or higher. We recommend that you use the opportunity to upgrade to 2.6 or higher. But if you're at 2.1 or under, it's a more significant change. In any case, as long as your platform version number is fairly up to date, then you'll be able to leverage the O3 reference applications front end. All right, let's move along. What do you need to know? Well, let's step back in time. Here's the OpenMRS version 2 reference application. You might remember this user interface with the greens and purple. So this was the ref app version 2 with this JSP front end. Now with OpenMRS 3, oh, sorry, this is actually version 1. We've been through this change before. This was version 1 of our interface way back before 2012. And when we started out with our OpenMRS platform, we were highly modular. The focus of the community was not 100% the reference application together. Our focus was a bit more on the platform, and the reference front end or reference application was optional. Over time, though, the vision was that different organizations, if we go org 1, 2, 3, ABC, etc., they would be sharing the same version of the platform, even if they had ideally they would have a shared user interface, but they could customize that with modules. But as time went by over the years, different teams, for very reasonable reasons, needed to change their front-end technology. For example, maybe you couldn't find someone to hire who was very comfortable with JSP. Maybe for whatever reason, your team wanted to use a JS framework for your front end. In any case, we ended up with many organizations having different custom front ends, even though we were sharing the same platform. This meant that it was hard for us to share work. And here's what it looked like. When COVID hit, this was what different major OpenMRS systems looked like. You can see just how different they look. This means that when COVID hit and people wanted to share different widgets around, say, COVID immunization, well, we couldn't. We could share some of the back-end components because we were sharing the same platform, but we weren't sharing the same front end. And this ended up causing global duplication of efforts and features. The biggest case study example of this was Ampath. They were, years ago, they said, you know what, we don't want to use the community reference application. We want something that works really well at the point of care, which at the time, reference application version 2 had some things about it that were really good and not so good for point of care. So this non-for-profit organization built their own custom version of the user interface, and it worked well enough. In fact, it worked so well that their point of care user interface was really popular among their providers. And I used to be a nurse myself, and it was the first time ever that I had had nurses and clinicians grab me by the shirt excitedly to show me their EMR. Usually, often people don't like their EMR, but they're so excited to show me their EMR there. That's how much they love the system. But there was a threatening problem underneath. It could not be scaled. Their dev team was of limited size because Ampath was not a software consulting firm. They're a care organization. They're a nonprofit that specializes in care. And they realized that by creating their own custom front end, they had accidentally created software that other people could not use, and they were alone in maintaining it. And they suddenly realized it's wasteful and unsustainable for us to continue this siloed approach to OpenMRS development. And to their credit, the Ampath team went on to be one of the co-founders of OpenMRS 3. We're going to come back to this. All right, so version 2 we've looked at, and here is version 3. This is what we're going to start working together on. A couple special things about OpenMRS version 3. In version 2, we had not optimized the user interface for tablet, whereas in version 3, together as a community, we're trying to do a lot of work to keep it responsive so that if your site requires a tablet, you can switch between. However, we do recommend using the tablet in portrait mode. One of the things you're going to see how to configure is what you want to show up in your patient chart tabs. What are the different pages that you want available? You can rename these, you can reorder these, all through JSON configuration. If you want to add program-specific views that, for example, only show several diabetes-related widgets or HIV-related widgets or maternity-related widgets, that's all fine and can also be fairly straightforwardly configured. All right, some quick foundation, and thanks again to everyone who's already seen this in OpenMRS Foundations last week. We're almost done the overlap. Let's look at this example. This is a real screenshot from OpenMRS 3. Let's see how this example was built using O3 widgets or mini apps. So one of the most important things about OpenMRS 3 for us to avoid that chaotic user interface global community is to agree on some shared conventions, starting with what does the skeleton look like, or the navigation rather. So we've agreed on several conventions as a community, such as the left navigation and the body and the patient header, and then the workspace where editing stuff happens. And we'll look at that a bit more together shortly. But what matters here is that these front-end JavaScript apps are built using a micro front-end technology framework. We use a technology called single SPA, and we're going to look at that as well. That helps us to effectively sandbox JavaScript apps from one another. So these apps are individually calling the API through to the backend. So for example, here in this view, you might choose to have the community's reference application set up with the Vitals app, but you might say, you know what, my organization made a custom lab app that we would really like to show up here, and you can add that in with JSON config. Same thing if you look at what another organization did, maybe across your border or a neighboring organization in another region, and you say, I really like how they customized their immunizations app. You might also want to pull in that app. And as a result, that has allowed us to create many squads that are working on different features at a time to increasingly enhance and add to what's available in OpenMRS 3 features. So for example, here on this screen, you're seeing the attachments feature, you're seeing the vital signs smart form, you're seeing medication orders, you're seeing special search, and so on and so on. All of these examples are actually mini apps. They're specifically their ESMs. This has some big strategic implications for you and your team. It means that you no longer have to talk to your stakeholders as if you only have one kind of content area. You can customize your content more than ever before. All right, let's have a really quick look at OpenMRS 3. We're going to do more of a demo later, but I'm just going to quickly play this video, and then we will look at the technology stack more together. Okay, that was a really quick tour, and also, to be honest with you, a little bit old. The application's been improved significantly since then. So overall, this is how the tech stack compares. So here's what we were working with before with platform version 2 and RefApp version 2. Now on the right, you can see RefApp version 3 still on platform version 2 and above. All right, so on the left, you can see in the back end, we continue to have support for various database types, MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB. So that continues. Hibernate and Liquid-based support continue. Spring, REST API, Fire API, these all continue. But what is particularly new is the emphasis on React.js. Even though our micro front-end framework allows you technically to use any JavaScript framework. So for example, we have had teams who were using a JavaScript framework that's specifically designed for charts. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I want to say Hibernate, but that's wrong. Anyway, a high charts, I think it was. Anyway, they were able to plug that in. If you have an app written in Vue or Angular, you can technically plug that in. However, we have found that it's a bit more successful when most of the community is aligning on React, but it is not it's not a showstopper if your team is more comfortable with Angular. You can write Angular apps. We just recommend React just for consistency. So ECMAScript modules is the format that we use specifically to host these micro front ends and to plug them in. So as you can see, this is different than the JSP, HTML5, jQuery world that we used to live in on our front end. Before I do anything else, if you don't already have these two resources bookmarked, please do that right away. These are mission critical for your OpenMRS 3 journey. I'll put the links in the chat. The first one is the dev guide, and everyone should be looking at this. So after today's call, you're going to want to have a look at that dev guide because it has most of what you'll need to know, and it's a good place to get started from when it comes to either configuring and then developing with O3 apps. The next one is the UI pattern library, and this will help you get started with knowing what design patterns to follow. So let's say you're working with one of your project managers or business analysts in your team, and they say, hey, I really want to design a new app for O3. You would sit together and you would look at the UI pattern library to make sure that the patterns you're developing in your application match the shared patterns of the community, because we're trying to avoid getting into this chaotic user interface situation again. Why was the customized interfaces an issue for interoperability? Doesn't Fire make user interface irrelevant in terms of data exchange? Yes, great point. However, almost none of these systems were, with a few exceptions, very few were using Fire very heavily. So that was problem number one. These interfaces weren't calling Fire, and so there were, even if they were using our existing Fire API, a lot of what they had built in did not actually have Fire API coverage and was strictly using the REST API. So it didn't necessarily help our being Fire. It was not Fire forward. But the bigger issue is it means that for us as a community, even though this is absolutely fine, if you come away today and you say, you know what, I actually don't like the reference application, I would rather use the OpenMRS platform to build my own stuff on top of your data model, no problem. We're open source. You're welcome to do so. However, what we find and have found over the last few years is that our community of implementers are really looking for a shared product that they can launch as out of the box as possible. And as you can see here, this was not a shared product strategy as a community. And so that meant that if you wanted to develop an immunizations widget that shows, for example, someone's immunization schedule for COVID, you would have to rebuild that. Like this system was using Angular. I can't remember which version. This one is Angular JS version 1. These ones were JSPs and so on. We want you to know that as you go through your OpenMRS 03 developer configurer journey, We do have quite a bit of support available. We have support anytime on Slack at this Slack channel, as well as a daily coffee break call. This is a half hour office hour every day for you to come and just say, hey, I'm having this issue, or I have this question about how I'm using O3 as a developer. And finally, last but not least, we have a weekly call every Thursday where organizations and individuals around the world who are using O3 will come and share how they are using it. They'll show, here's what we worked on. Dennis, Vineet, and Jayasanko will demonstrate any major framework improvements that they've done. For example, this past year, we did a lot of work on performance improvements. And so over the last year, often on those weekly calls, Dennis and team would explain those performance enhancements and what had gone into them. If you want to practice comparing the previous EMR to the current EMR, there are some links available for you, and I'll put a link to the slides in the chat so you can come back to this. In OpenMRS 3, as an admin, we have not really changed your tools, so don't worry, your reports and your usual configuration as an admin have not significantly changed. O3 does not change your reports.